Welcome to the Parenting Different podcast, where we share real adoption stories, have honest conversations, and give hope for the hard days. We're here to encourage parents, build understanding, and make sure that every child is seen, heard, and valued. Welcome to the Parenting Different podcast. My name is Anna Bernacki, and I am here with Madison. I am so excited to have you with us today. Madison is a dietitian and also adoptive mom. And so you bring together two very unique things and are connecting worlds that maybe initially we wouldn't think right off the bat go so closely together, but they really do. And so I'm really excited to talk to you and pick your brain just for my own sake, honestly. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you are connected to the adoption world, your story, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm
Of
excited to be
course.
here. So, my husband and I in 2014, so before we got married, so that was, I guess, 11, almost 12 years ago, had decided like adoption was going to be something we would pursue. And to keep it concise and not to go too far back, but as far back as I can remember as a little girl, like I was always drawn to kids. I loved babysitting and loved kids. And as I got into my teen years, I just started learning more about that there were kids that didn't have parents,
Mm,
or just learning about orphan care and understanding that most, or not most, but a lot of kids didn't grow up with what I had. And so it just kind of, I feel like the Lord just started kind of putting that on my heart. And so when I was seriously dating and looking to possibly get married, I was like, hey, look, this is something that I'm going to do. Are you in or not? Because if not, there's no point in us doing this. And he was he was like, yes, he also grew up in a home where he just felt like he was always supported and he always had all of his needs met. And then just knowing there were kids that didn't have that. So it was kind of on our hearts early on.
yeah.
And as we were married, we kind of thought in our minds, like, oh, we'll have to wait till we're older because we knew it was expensive and, all those things. But early in our marriage, I remember meeting with a friend and she just kind of casually mentioned, because I was telling her, like, oh, it would be so cool to be a dietitian in an orphanage. Like she was saying, if you could do anything without thinking of money, like if for any price, like, or whatever, you would get paid like the same, what would you do? And I was like, oh, if I could like help kids with nutrition in an orphanage or something. And she was
Yeah.
like, have you ever thought about foster care? And I was like, no, I have never thought about foster care. Like, what? I don't know much about this. And I really just hadn't heard much about it. And so I started learning more about that world. And this was just a couple years into our marriage. And we were pretty young when we got married, like 24. And just as I started to learn about the need just in our own city, like right around us, and then learning there wasn't a financial barrier, you kids need help today, and you have an extra bedroom in your house. You love kids, so of course, we prayed about it and talked to different people, but we kind of got started kind of quickly fostering, and that was officially we started in 2017. And then eventually, one of our daughters, who we've adopted, she came to us through foster care. It took a long time, um, just to finalize her adoption, several years, but that's how adoption first kind of came in the picture. But then throughout that process of fostering, we were able to reunify several kids. We did feel called and ready to like welcome children in permanently, and we never wanted like that to be in the back of our minds with our kids. We loved every kid that came in our home, but we
Yeah.
still wanted to support reunification. And we never
For
wanted to
sure.
have this like, oh, we're never going to have a child of our own. Or we just didn't want that to be something that would make it harder for us to advocate for unification for our kids. So we started the international adoption process. It took a very long time, like 3.5 years, but we adopted a daughter from India as well. We have
Wow.
two adopted daughters. Yeah, one locally through foster care and then one internationally. And we still have our home open, but mostly just to do respite for other foster families or emergency placements. So we're not really taking like long-term placements right now. But that's kind of how I got into the world of adoption.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't even realize that you had adopted internationally. I guess I didn't realize
Yes.
that. And our timelines are almost identical because we got married in
Okay.
2014 and we started fostering in 2017. So that's really funny because
Oh,
we have the same timelines there.
yes.
Yeah. So you are also a dietitian. What drew you to becoming a dietitian?
Yeah, so I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like, it's so funny because we expect, 17 and 18-year-olds to know what they're going to do, like, for the
Right.
rest of their life. And I didn't know. So
Right.
I went in like undeclared because I was like, I don't know. But I did love helping people and I loved kids. And I actually considered social work at first. And then even just talking to some people and reading some things, I was like, I don't have the heart for that. Of course, I didn't know later I would become a foster parent. But I was like, I can't do that. That's too hard. And then I was just looking at like courses that I could take, like classes. I was like, ooh, nutrition has always been like, I just like learning about nutrition and food and our bodies. And I just thought those would be fun classes to take. And so I was like, well, what could I do with that? And then I just started learning about who a dietitian was. I didn't even know like what dietitians did, and learning that there were a lot of options. You could work closely with people and you can help people and you can work with kids. And I was just like, okay, I think this is what I want to do. And I noticed I've always known, I feel like even early on, before I considered becoming a dietitian, I remember even just as a teenager noticing that there's such a psychological relationship with food. Like it's not just nutrition and food, it's not just scientific. Like it's very psychological. And I was always kind of interested in psychology too. And just understanding how, all of our past kind of shape how we think about things. So I think kind of those things together brought me into that world. And I love it. I enjoy my career a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's so interesting because I'm sure when you stepped into foster care that you and then adopting, you didn't probably realize at the time what a correlation there was between the need for your skill set and having kids with trauma. Kids with a background of trauma struggle with food in many, many ways. And I think we see that over and over. I've seen it with all of my kids to some degree, from just being really picky eaters to sensory eaters, like certain textures we have to completely avoid, all the way to hoarding food to the point we had a mouse infestation in the room because there was so much
Mm,
food and we couldn't get her to understand that it would always be available for her. It's so complex, and I know so many adoptive parents and foster parents struggle with this. What do we do? How do we help them develop a healthy relationship with food and grow? So how has it shown up, or has it? Maybe it hasn't. How have you worked through those issues in your home? Have you been able to put things in place that are preventative? Um, and just kind of talk about the psychological, like the trauma and food correlation.
yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I had like in our training before we became foster parents, there was like a little bit mentioned about like food hoarding. Like they kind of mentioned, hey, you might notice like kids, might be hiding food or sneaking food or wanting extra food. This happens with kids with food insecurity. Like just don't punish them, like try to be gracious. And that's kind of the extent of it. Like that was all we learned about. And so yeah, our very first placement, it was like very apparent. And I mean, looking back now, we were like, oh, well, that's obvious. That's what the issue was. Of course, at the time, we're brand new to parenting at
Right.
all, and a kid with a history of trauma. So we're like, we don't really know what's happening, but there was just like this, not being able to leave the kitchen or even go to like sleeping was terrifying because she didn't know if she was going to wake up to food or not. And
Wow.
just
Yeah.
like wanting more and more, like, this was like a 3-year-old who'd already had, like, she saw bananas on the counter and she wanted a banana. We're like, okay, sure, we can have a banana before bed, no big deal. And when she finished that one, she wants another one. And we're like, okay, well, maybe we'll share it. Like, you can have, you're still a little hungry, we'll share. And then she's wanting another one. And it's like, okay, well, and she's already, had, a really hefty dinner and all these things. And so it was kind of like, oh goodness, I wasn't expecting it to
And
be
that's at
this.
3.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And like
That's
major
intense.
meltdown, and yes. And so then it's harder to like, which it's even hard to explain this to a teenager who's experienced food insecurity,
Yes.
but to
Absolutely.
say, hey, I promise you, we will have food for you, like in the morning, like, they don't really have that, depending on the kiddo and their history and their developmental age, they don't have the ability to really understand what you're saying or to trust, like, you haven't given them a chance to trust you yet. So they don't know you. You're a stranger. You could just be saying whatever you want to get them to go to bed. So yeah, we kind of like right out of the gate was like, oh, feeding issues, like this is pretty common. And then just as we kept, going down the line, I would hear from other foster families, like maybe not the exact same experiences, some similar, but then like you mentioned, like picky eating or just food refusal, like just almost like on a food strike, like not eating at all, and just all these different things. And then noticing parents really, really worried about their kids' nutrition because all they could get them to eat, would be snack foods or what they would call junk foods. And just so many food concerns, like either personally we were experiencing, or hearing other foster families experience them. And then trying to look and see, like, what do people say? What are people saying? Like, how do you handle this? And it was really hard to find, like you said, either the information was either kind of conflicting or there just wasn't that much information out there. Um, so a lot of what we've learned has kind of just been trial and error. But then also like me kind of finding and connecting with, especially like eating disorder dietitians, since
Mhm.
they are more trauma informed because so many people with eating disorders have a history of trauma. So connecting with them and learning from them. And then there's the feeding doctor, Dr. Katia Roel, talks a lot about this. She's done a lot of work in this area. So just using those resources has kind of helped me have tips and things to help share with families. We need to understand the connection between trauma and nutrition. And so I feel like before you handle really anything with any kid, because it's all going to be individualized because every kid is unique and their experience is unique. And there's not like a one size fits all, like do this and this will definitely work. But I will say being curious with your kid and really compassionate and gentle, and just instead of saying like, what's wrong with you? These are kind of the trauma things that we learn. Instead of thinking, what's wrong with you? Think what happened to you, and really like try to dig into that. And you may not, if it's a really young kiddo or someone who's not developmentally able to express themselves, they may not be able to respond to your questions. Like, but start with trying to find out and ask, like, hey, I noticed this behavior around food, or I noticed, some wrappers in your room, or I noticed that you kept eating, after you had a decent amount. Like, kind of, can you tell me what's going on? Or has there been an experience where, just kind of starting to get them to talk and share? And sometimes they might not even know, they might not remember
Right.
or know what they're doing or be able to express it. But just starting from that place in general helps you to be more patient with them, because you're already recognizing and honoring, like, there's probably an experience. Most likely they're not just trying to be annoying or disobedient,
Right.
or,
Right.
like there's something going on here and they need help and they need support. So let's start with kind of the why. And again, if you don't find out the answer, kind of usually it depends on the kiddo and the situation, but usually the first and most important thing is that you allow that child to know that they can trust you, that you are a safe place, that you are going to meet their needs. And for some kids, they learn that really quickly, like just some structure and some routine. And every day, they wake up and you have breakfast ready, or you help. you have them help pick out their breakfast. You have, snack time before lunch. You have lunch. Just kind of having this like, hey, every day we're going to offer meals, at these times we're going to offer snacks and just being consistent. And sometimes just that structure and routine for a short time is all a kid needs. Now, other times, and I've experienced this, that can take even years, honestly, for
Yeah.
that child to know. And I mean, and there's adults that I've talked to who experience food insecurity and they still struggle. And so and they're the ones going to the grocery store and, and they have the autonomy. And so it's so big, and it's with anything psychological, it's going to be different for everyone. But the priority is to help them to feel safe, to help them to earn your trust. And you can do that with structure and routine and also being flexible. So it's kind of, that sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but offering meals consistently and snacks consistently, that's the structure. But then being flexible with, instead of being rigid and saying, know, the kitchen is closed. We can't have anything after this time. Like, we have to be a lot more flexible because that
Yeah.
can stimulate a lot of fear in a child. And they're going to be thinking, oh, well, the kitchen closes, then I better eat as much as I possibly can before that happens. Or I need to save some food for later because what if I wake up in the middle of the night hungry? Or what if I'm hungry at 7 p.m. and the kitchen is closed? And so we do need to allow for more flexibility for sure. And one thing that we do in my house too is we have like a little section of the pantry where it's like you can have these foods at any time. You don't have to ask. So, and we try to have like healthier options for that so that they're not just eating 12 bags of chips, just
Right.
one financially, that's not helpful,
Right.
So we have things that they like, but maybe not their absolute favorite. And, I've seen some, like, I saw one foster parent in like a chat that I'm in was like, I have all these snacks for them. These are our free foods, but they never eat them and they say they don't like any of them. And I'm like, well, okay, well then we really do need to add in some things that they like.
Right.
They need to have some
Right.
things that they like, even if it's not their favorite thing. Like, we have to meet them, we have to kind of meet in the middle and find. So it could be granola bars or protein bars or like, those little protein meat sticks like beef jerky. There's all kinds of things that you can put, just perishable or non-perishable things that they can have. And those are
Yeah.
things that also they can have in their room. I think it is important to have some structure around that. So if you do have a child maybe that's having that free food where, oh, here, you can come and get this snack anytime, this is always available. If that's not enough because they're worried, well, my siblings might eat it all, or
Mhm. Yeah.
there still might be some anxiety over that. If that's not enough, then I do see a lot of times where it is helpful for them to have like a little, container in their room where they can keep some non-perishable foods. But I do think it's important that you have some structure, like saying either, hey, we're going to have to check this, at the end of the week, or maybe at the end of the month to make sure nothing's expired, to make sure there's nothing opened, that we're keeping things cleanly and not crumbs
Yeah.
everywhere, like and hey, you have to play your part. You got to throw it away when you're done. We don't want food and trash and wrappers all over the room and stuff like that. So having some structure around that, but then them still having and knowing like, this is mine, just for me. Nobody's going to take this. I've seen that to be really, really helpful. And then we also have like fruit and, vegetables and like in the, string cheese and some yogurt and stuff like
Yeah.
that in the fridge that they can also have. So a lot of times I do try to teach my kids that, hey, some of these snacks, we don't do good food, bad food, but we do talk about how some snacks are not going to satisfy us for very long. And so we talk about how to add some protein and how to add some fiber because those things will help us, stay more satisfied longer. So
Yeah.
it's hard to do that sometimes with all those pantry snacks. So, you know, we like to have kind of some options open for them. And it's easier with older kids too because it's easier for them to grab. But with younger kids, I think that structure and even saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
it's 10 a.m. It's snack time. Like, let's pick out a snack." And so just even helping them get in that routine. And there are some kids who, experience trauma who have issues with those interoceptive skills, like those internal body feelings like, you think of kids maybe who don't notice they need to use the restroom till the very last minute. Well, there's some kids who don't notice they're hungry, or the opposite, they don't notice when they're full. And so you have to help kind of then learn how to tune into those body signals. And I've seen kind of one of the ways that we've done that in our home is I'll just kind of narrate my own, like, after we come inside, after being outside playing for a little bit, ooh, I'm really thirsty. I really need to drink something. Or, oh wow, it's been 3 hours since I've had something to eat. I think I need a snack. I'm feeling my stomach feels a little empty, and just kind of teaching them that language, sometimes that helps. But again, those things I've also seen can take a long time for kids. So I
Yeah.
feel like one of the most important things when dealing with feeding issues is being really patient and understanding. Like, our kids aren't just going to come into our home and just go with the flow and do everything the way that we've been doing it and just be okay with it. Like, we have to really help them slowly adapt,
Yeah.
and just allow for that to kind of take time.
Yeah. I love what you said about kind of narrating what you're doing. And I think that's really important because so often we are talking about good food, bad food, right? Because that is, especially as adults, we're this time of year, it's January, everybody's starting their diet, and oh, that's bad. I can't have that. Oh, I'm going to be good today. I'm only going to eat this. And I think that that adds a lot of pressure to kids because they're not understanding the nutritional value of food. And so we're telling them this is bad, and they're going, but I like that. Why is that bad?
Yes.
And I even found that with one of my children. She's been with us for a very long time. And it was recently that we kind of were able to break down what was happening because I'm like, you never eat anything healthy. Like, come on. We've got to balance this out. And you're going to have, she's starting to have problems with her stomach. And I'm like, we've
Yeah.
got to balance this out. And
Yeah.
we can't only eat that. And what came out of the conversation was, you are saying that this is bad. This is what my mom always bought for me.
Mm.
And so now you're saying that what my favorite thing, and that was
Mm.
the way after abuse, was the
Mm.
love bombing with junk food.
Yeah.
And so that was her connection time with her mom,
Yeah.
was with junk food.
Mm.
And so now we're sitting here saying, this isn't good for you. This is bad. And she's hearing, my mom is bad, even
Yes.
though that's not what we're saying at all.
Right.
And so I think that that is our language. And that took, I mean, years. We're talking 8-ish years that it took me to figure that out. And I never, ever, like, I feel horrible that it ever came across that way. So I think it's so important to really think about what could be heard. And then if we're
Yeah.
walking in and narrating that, I love that. If we're narrating, we got to think about what they're hearing because they pick up everything.
Yes.
And so,
Mm.
really narrating, hey, I'm going to choose protein because I need to fuel my body. I need higher fiber because that's going to fill me up longer. I think having those explanations of why you're eating and not just, I'm going to be good, I'm overweight, I need to lose weight, and having the, that's when the unhealthy correlation with foods have already been developed with so many of these kids. So
Right.
let's not make it worse.
You're so right. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we are like the best role model for our kids. So, we can't force them to like vegetables and to like,
Right.
healthier foods. But the more they see us enjoying those things, and the more they're exposed to them in like safe, non-pressure environments, then the more comfortable they'll be and the more open they'll be to trying them. But if, like you said, if we're just saying, well, that's what you like is bad and what I like is good, then they even, like you said, they may internalize that and think, well, my first parent was bad for giving me this. Or they might even, a lot of kids, even not from a trauma background, internalize that and say, well, I must be a bad kid because I like
Yes.
sugar and I like chips and I like these things. And that's
Yes.
when sometimes sneaking happens because they're embarrassed or ashamed because they've been told that those things are bad. So it's so important that we try to be neutral with food, but it is, I mean, obviously I'm a dietitian. I know nutrition is important. Like I do want my kids to understand the value of, having a variety in their diet and having good overall health. I mean, we know that, gut health and adequate protein and adequate hydration, those things help with their own, anxiety or their regulation. Those are important, but those things can take time. And the first kind of the foundational thing is that they kind of like I mentioned earlier, is that they can trust you. And as they learn to trust you, they're also going to kind of admire some of the things that you're doing. And so when they notice you're saying, "Ooh, I really need to fuel my body right now, and these are the ways I'm going to fuel my body. I am going to enjoy a little bit of, something sweet because I enjoy sweets, but I also want to make sure that I have some protein to help me kind of have more fuel." And so continuing to have that is so important. And then another thing that's really important when we're talking about low pressure exposure for kids to new foods is family meals. And I'm a big advocate for family style meals where you serve the food. I am not, I mean, I only have two kids in my home permanently. We've had, maybe four at a time at the most. But I can't imagine families with lots of kids trying to meet every single need and make something for every kid. Like we don't even do that in our house. And so I can't imagine people. So we have one meal, like this is the family meal, but I do try to strategically make sure that there's at least one thing that I know my kid likes. So like I'm not gonna just serve all foods that I know that they won't eat. And if maybe they normally like this and tonight they don't, then I might be like, hey, if they're old enough, like, hey, you can, make a sandwich or you can grab something that you can do yourself, like, that's not going to be
Right.
extra for me to do. Or, like, hey, why don't you just like pick a fruit or we'll have some bread. And that's kind of what and again, this is where we are with our kids because we have a good, strong connections, like they have felt safety. I wouldn't necessarily recommend being as strict if they're kids that are new to your home and or that you're having trouble. If it's taking a really long time for that kid to trust you, then you're going to have to be a lot more lenient and a lot more flexible with like, hey, okay, if you're only eating mac and cheese, like we'll serve mac and cheese with every meal for a period of time with alongside other things because when they're sitting at the table with you able to eat their safe food they feel comfortable, they're watching you and their your parents or siblings eat some of these other foods, they're starting to feel safer around those new foods and they're
Yeah.
starting to grow a little bit of interest and they see you enjoying it. And so for a lot of kids, especially the ones that are just really need to control something, like I feel like picky eating is so common in a lot of our kids because everything else in their life is out of their control, and the one thing they can control is what they choose to eat. And so, trying to allow it to be their choice instead of this pressure of like, well, you have to finish your vegetables if you want dessert, or that language really just doesn't work with our kids, and it doesn't make them like vegetables. It actually makes them, it elevates dessert and it elevates sweets and those other things, and it makes them seem like more desirable. Um, so it is important to be flexible, but still, like I kind of mentioned earlier, having that structure, but just having that exposure to foods. And so, kind of how I started this was like, we are the best example for our kids.
Yeah.
And some of it could be like, I don't know for your daughter in that case, and I know she was with you for a long time, but especially early on, she had never been exposed to these other foods, so when they only know these things and that feels safe to them, or they have fond memories with those foods, it would be really a disservice if we took them all away, and so, and I know,
Right.
that's not what you did, but there are some families that are like, we're just getting rid of all the junk, like no more. And that just creates so much tension, and it doesn't allow for that child to feel connected and to feel safe and to be open to trying new things. So we're really big on balance. Like, okay, well, if you're going to have that, like, what's something we can add? Like, I'm a really big on nutrition by addition rather than subtraction. Like, instead of thinking and focusing on all the things we need to take out of our diet, like, let's focus on how can we add in more fiber or more fruit or, more protein? Like, what can we add to this to make it satisfy our bodies better?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it because if we're adding instead of taking away, because so much has been taken away from these kids.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
something what seems as little as, okay, we're getting rid of a bag of chips or some cookies, that is just one more thing they're losing. So
Yes.
that's a really good point that I had never considered. I also wanted to ask you too, when we hear all kinds of advice, right? Um, so I'm gonna give you some of the things I've heard, and I want your opinion on them.
Okay.
Some are
I'll be
terrible, and I
honest.
know they're terrible, and I just want to hear it from you. So one of the things, lock up your food, lock it all up at night, and only leave a bowl of fruit on the counter, and that's all they can have.
Yeah, I don't love that advice. I mean, again, I feel like every kid situation is going to be unique, but I feel like if you're having to even consider locking it up, then there's obviously an issue, an underlying issue, or something that that child has experienced that I feel like no one would even consider doing that unless their kid was waking up in the night and trying to get food or kids getting food. So, again, you would need to have the conversation with them like, hey, what's going on? And let's consider some other options because all you're doing when you do that is saying you don't trust your child. So then how are they going to trust you? And I'm not saying, I mean, there are some things that need to be locked up. Like, if your child is sneaking into the alcohol cabinet or something like, then
Well, yeah,
yes,
that's
you need to,
that's
there are,
different.
it's different. Thank you. It is different for
Yeah,
sure. So, but food is, I mean, that is what we all humans need that to survive. And for some kids who are maybe forced to eat certain foods they don't like, or they're not exposed to as many foods that they're familiar with, and they're getting hungry at night, then that can invoke a lot of fear if they don't have access to
yeah,
something. But again, I think it's okay to set some boundaries like, hey, these are the things that will be open to you besides just fruit. And again, making sure there is something that you know that they like. And if they only, right now, if they only say they like chips or cereal or, whatever, like just don't leave out 12 bags of it for them, but
right.
leave something. Like have it available for them if that's all that because again, your goal is to help them earn your trust. And they deserve to earn it. Like they don't need to, it's a lot for us to expect our kids to just trust us immediately when we
Yeah,
don't do that with other people,
right. And they have no
So
reason to trust us
exactly.
because
Yeah.
when a parent who is the person who's supposed to be the most trustworthy person on the planet becomes untrustworthy, you're a stranger. They have no
Exactly.
reason, absolutely no reason
Exactly.
to trust you. So then, what was another one I heard? Oh, have a box of food that's theirs, fill it up at the beginning of the week, and then once it's gone, it's gone.
I know. I have seen that. And I think it would have to really depend on the situation. Like I can't see when I would do that necessarily for my kids. I guess I'm trying to think of like why a parent might do that. And, maybe if they're spending so much money on food, I guess I can understand like if there's a budget reason or if, I don't know. I'd have to pick their brain to find out more why. But
Yeah.
what my response to why that might not be a good idea is because what if that child is still working on learning fullness cues? They don't understand, when they've had too much yet. And it's Tuesday and they've already eaten all their snacks because they're still learning how to understand how to use food to fuel their body and how to recognize fullness. So then there's going to be a lot of fear over like, okay, what do I do now? And there's going to be sneaking and lying and there may not be, but even if there's not those things, there's going to be a lot of fear in that child, which
Yeah.
again is going to be harder for them to trust you. And they may truly get hungry. Like if they don't have any snacks, I mean, our brains don't operate well. Like my brain doesn't, even though it's fully developed. When I am hungry, I mean, my emotion, it is hard for me to stay regulated. And so, how do we expect our young kids who are still growing in their bodies and they need more carbohydrates percentage wise than we do, and they need food a little more frequently than we do? How do we expect them to behave well and focus when they don't have that? So, I would like, I hate to say I would never ever recommend that, but I feel like I would never recommend that. I don't think there's a situation when when I would like that.
Yeah, and I think the way it was explained to me was it'll teach them to kind of figure out and only eat so much at a time, or you get to the end of the week and you don't have anything and you're hungry. And so, but I feel like these are not the things we need to be teaching our kids with trauma.
I was
That
gonna say, yeah, maybe in a situation where there's a child who's been in your home always and you already
Yeah,
know their relationship with food and you already, maybe in that situation. But again, I would hate to deal with the effects of how my child is going to react when they're hungry and they don't have snacks. So I don't
right.
know. I would find another way to teach them, I think, how to help
Yeah.
limit that,
And it's
even if it's
yeah,
just a daily amount, like, hey, this is what you have for today. And then that way, they're not going multiple days without us.
yeah, because and these kids they're in fight or flight. There's too much going on in their brains anyway, that teaching them to budget food is not even on their
Not a
radar.
priority. Yeah,
Yeah.
not a priority.
Yeah. What else would you tell a parent who is just really struggling? They have a variety of eating issues. I mean, my goodness, we could probably talk for an hour on each
Yeah.
child in my home.
Mhm.
But the texture, everything from textures is a little bit easier to navigate, but textures, picky eating, hoarding, eating, even like real eating disorders. What would you recommend to the parents? I mean, obviously, we're not shaming the kids. We're trying to get to the bottom of
Yeah.
it. But what else would you tell parents to really kind of help them make those next steps and be able to connect with the child and get to the
Yeah.
bottom of it? Because it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just you showing your kid how much it concerns you in a sense of not because you're worried about the implications it's having on you, but because you genuinely care about your kid and you want to make sure they have everything they need to thrive. So really trying to meet them where they are, kind of like we've talked about, and because each of these scenarios are so different, so how you might handle them would be so different. But I do think it's important to mention that some of these situations, like you really should get a professional involved with, especially if there's any concern of eating disorder, like we've got to get psychology. And it could even be like kind of the reason I got even into this was there are so many great eating disorder dietitians doing great things, helping individuals, whether they're children, adolescents, or adults, navigate that. But I really want to help prevent it. And we've learned there's research that shows, of course, our kids with a history of trauma, four or more ACEs. I mean, this was a study in Hungary, so it's not necessarily like applies to all kids, but generally they are about 6 times more likely to develop eating disorders. So they're very likely, and a lot of that is their desire to be in control. But what I really hope to help parents with is to help prevent that. Like, how do
Yeah.
we help prevent that? So when you notice some of these feeding issues like hoarding or picky eating or very limited diet or whatever, like you said, the sensory, aversions, food aversions, or even some of times it's sensory seeking. I have that in my home. So just whenever you notice these things, how you handle it is so important because, and I never want to cause any fear to parents. Like I feel like one of the biggest issues with nutrition right now is there's so much fear mongering and there's so much misinformation online that parents are afraid, like, oh my gosh, if my kid doesn't eat the right thing, then their health is going to be terrible forever, or they're never going to get regulated, or they're never going to, do this or that, or they're always going to have these issues, and because they're eating these XYZ and they need to be eating ABC. And I feel like that's like the worst way to um, be teaching our kids. And
Yeah.
it's just parenting from a place of fear. It never, and I've experienced, like, I've done this. It doesn't work
I think we
very
all
well.
have. Yeah.
You're right, right. Um, but I understand the fear at the same time because we love our kids and we want them to
Right.
thrive. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to invoke fear on parents and say, oh, if you say the wrong thing, you're going to cause an eating disorder. Because we don't need more of this pressure of like, are we doing it right? But just to maybe give some encouragement, there is so much more research that supports making sure our kids, in order for them to have a healthy relationship with food, it's really telling us, hey, we need to be making sure our kids feel safe around food, that they feel safe around people. I mean, there's one of my favorite studies is the Harvard study on longevity. It's like the longest study to date on kind of evaluating what helps people live longer. And this is like not necessarily trauma related, but they've studied, I mean, tens of thousands of people, individuals over varying socioeconomic backgrounds, and so a lot of their participants have experienced ACEs. But in general, no matter what your background is, they found that really the best thing for our health is, of course, exercise and diet. Those things all play a role, but the most important thing is actually connections to people, like having good, strong relationships. And so I guess my biggest encouragement to parents is to focus as much as you can on connecting with your kid. And that's why, like, my, kind of business or whatever, my handle is Nourish with Connection, because that is foundational for
Yeah.
our kids, not only for their relationship with you, which is so important, but really for their own health, like long term. That connection is so foundational. And ways you can help stay connected to them is sharing, if you are concerned about something, like sharing, hey, I'm really concerned that you're eating this way or that you're doing this behavior. But I want to find out, how I can support you, and not just start listing out demands like this is what you need to do, but trying to meet them where they are. I think that will speak volumes to them and really help them. And of course, this depends on the kid's age, and
Sure.
developmental
Yeah.
ability and all those things. But if they're younger, then a lot of what I would recommend is just it taking time and then being with you, seeing you, observing you, having those family style meals. Those kinds of things will help with their long term relationship with food. But then also you having language around food that's healthy, meaning not shame, invoking shame and this is bad and this is good. And I kind of, to circle back, I think where my point I was trying to say, that really research is showing us that really the fear of food is a lot more harmful than actual foods that we're eating. Like, so if
Makes
we're
sense.
it, and it really is like not only psychologically, but our psychological health also impacts our physical health. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
we
Yes.
know this, but we forget, like, health is so holistic. Like, it's not just what we eat. Like, it is a part of it, but also how we move our bodies, what we kind of take in our environment, like what we're watching and consuming that way, and what we're listening to, and just even our environmental factors, like the air that we breathe or how much time we spend outside. And of course, genetics, like that plays a big part of our health. And that's not
Yeah.
something we can necessarily control, which I think is why so many people do like try to control food so much, because they're like, well, this is one of the few factors I can.
Right. Yeah.
So I think just acknowledging and recognizing that desire, even in us as parents, to want to control what our kids are eating, like we have to try to like relinquish some of that. Of course, we do have boundaries that we set, and we do decide what we buy from the store and bring in our home, and we do decide what we serve to our kids. We have those boundaries, but we need to also be really flexible and just remember the foundational, most important thing for our kids' health is that felt safety and connection. Like I always think of, I'm sure on your show, I think you talked about like TBRI, trust-based
Mhm.
relational intervention. But like
Yeah.
it always comes back to that to me. And like everything that Karen Purvis, taught and Texas Children has found, like that is so important, even when it comes to feeding our kids and their health, their nutrition. Like it's just making sure they feel safe and they feel connected. And they're going to be much more interested in what you have to say about nutrition when they have that felt safety and connection. And that can take time. But it's worth putting all the effort into that first, I think. And of course, you can be doing other things with that. Like you can be making fun smoothies and, things, trying to
Yeah.
be creative in the kitchen. Like I'm always saying, instead of, I don't recommend sneaking food like veggies and things, being too sneaky, because that can also affect trust from your kids. But if you are adding in veggies to something, you can try to say, hey, today we're going to have, like I recently made Grinch pancakes. Like we put some spinach and banana in our pancakes and they were Grinch. Or you could say, oh, we're going to make Hulk pancake, like, and this is
Yeah.
what gives it the color. So you're still making it exciting and you're not, of
Right.
course, it depends on the kid's age and everything, but find ways to meet your kids where they are and don't be forceful. Just be patient and remember that you being a strong support to them is actually very, very helpful to their health in the long term, rather than every single thing like what they're eating and what they're not eating.
Yeah. Well, and there was something you said in there too that actually really it kind of rang a bell for me as an adoptee. I think I don't have any health history. And so sometimes that for me is, well, I don't know, so I don't care. And it took me a really long time until I actually started having health problems for me to connect that I needed to be doing that preventative because I didn't know any history. I didn't have that. And so if we're talking about parenting adopted children, I mean, this is a light bulb that literally went off like 10 seconds ago. But if we're talking about our adopted children, we have to frame it in a different way than, grandma had cancer, grandpa had heart disease, so we need to eat this way to prevent that. Well, if you don't know that information, you don't care. It's just nothing. So I think that that is also important to think too, is we have to come at this from a different angle for our adopted kids too, because a family history is just not there and they're not going to care.
Right? Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think as adoptive parents, like that was kind of scary for me, like not knowing what is their medical history, like what if they
Yeah.
are at risk of, stroke or heart disease or whatever. And, I feel like that sometimes puts a little fear in me of like, I gotta make sure they're as healthy as they can be because they might have, for us as parents. But again, hopefully to help ease any anxiety for any parents is like instead of being so hyper fixated
Yeah.
on what they're eating, that fear of food can actually backfire, but just being more fixated on like, do my kids feel safe with me? Do they trust me? How can we make food feel safe? And how can we make the table inviting and family meals inviting is important. And because then that will help them, even if they don't care about their his medical history or their risks, they're at least they've been modeled, they've seen what like, healthy family meals look like, and hopefully they'll want to carry that on after they, whenever they choose to leave your
Yeah,
home.
for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was absolutely fantastic. I learned so much,
Yay.
and I feel like I
Yay.
could still talk to you for hours
I know
about
there's so much more. There really is.
yes,
But
there
it's been
is.
fun.
But I really appreciate it, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
You're so welcome. Thanks again for having me. I enjoyed it.